What's going on, NBA fans? How are we? Welcome into another week of Dropping Dimes. I'm your host, Matt Knost, and we are here to talk about more of the NBA for another week. And today, I'd like to discuss basically the state of player and fan interaction, expectation levels, uh, media criticism, and basically everything that covers. We'll get to as much as we can, and then I'll get to your questions towards the end. But the reason that the idea came to mind was we have the Ben Simmons stories unfolding, and we have the Russell Westbrook stories unfolding. And then living here in Los Angeles, the criticism that the Lakers are getting and the player reaction to it has become a story in and of itself. Um, and it just raises an interesting discussion as to what our role as fans are, what the players' expectation levels of what they should rightly come into contact with when they step onto that court as far as interactions with fans, and also the media, how the media discusses certain aspects of what goes on the court and off the court. So what sparked this was Ben Simmons tomorrow night is going to be on the bench for the Nets when they travel to Philly. And it looks like the rationale behind that is, word from his camp is that part of the reason that Ben is doing this, and I don't know how much, if it's the entire reason or just a small fraction of it. Part of the reason is that they want to get a record of how the fans treat Ben in that situation so that when they go to arbitration about trying to recoup his missing salary, they can use that as an example of part of the rationale of why his mental state deteriorated to the degree that it did. And I don't know. Personally, I think that's a bogus claim. The fans are not going to be unkind. I mean, pardon me, they're not going to be kind. They're going to boo, they're going to jeer, they're going to heckle him because he didn't perform well in the playoffs and then no-showed on the team. And that's to be expected. You're making a tremendous salary as one of the faces of a franchise. The criticism that gets leveled in your direction is going to be greater than it is for guys further on down the roster. They don't carry the weight of expectations of that team like you do, hence the salary that you get. And KD has said, when asked about it, I think, Ben will be able to handle it considering he makes $40 million a year. He can take a little bit of criticism coming his way from the fans, booing and whatnot. And I think the fans have every justifiable reason to do it. You were part of the process, part of the reason that they were bad for so long that they would get a high enough draft pick because the NBA is dominated by a select number of individuals, and you need one of those alphas if you have any championship aspirations. It is very rare, a la the Pistons in the early 2000s, to have a team that doesn't have a top 10 or top 20 player win a championship. It's exceedingly rare. So Hinkie's design of we're going to lose as many games as we possibly can to get a higher draft pick to increase our long-term chances of getting a championship. And you, Ben, were a byproduct of that calculus. So the fans suffered through years of some of the worst teams you've ever seen. Just abysmal teams. Because the light at the end of the tunnel was we will get someone who can change the fortunes of our franchise and our city. And you were taken as a top draft pick with those expectations. And then when you didn't live up to it in the playoffs, you then don't want to suffer the criticism. And I don't think you get to have it both ways. There is no cake for you to eat too on this one, in my opinion. I mean, look at your counterpart in Joel Embiid. He was getting lambasted by the TNT crew, with Chuck and Shaq predominantly, saying, "We expect more of you. If you are going to hold yourself in the same category as all the guys around you and consider yourself to be an all NBA player and an MVP caliber player, then you need to play like it night in, night out." And Embiid has gone on the record and saying that was motivation for me. I wanted to get better to not so much prove them wrong, but to prove them right in that if they have these beliefs of me and I do of myself, then I need to put in the time, work, and effort to justify my standing in the league. And I have to assume it was his agents telling Ben, look, if you go and we can get this footage, we can probably get some of this salary that you gave up by not wanting to play for the Sixers again. And as much as I am for the players, in this instance, I really hope when it goes to arbitration and the judge looks at it, the judge sides with the team on this because it also sets a terrible precedent for the rest of the league. Guys can just sit out whenever they want to and still get paid. That's then what is the point of a contract? Why even sign these things? If you expect to get paid regardless of whether or not you actually show up, well, couldn't the inverse be true? Why should you be expected to be paid just because they signed a contract with you? Um, I don't know. And then on the other side of that is Westbrook, and that's what really pushed me into wanting to talk about this today because he is upset with the narrative of Westbrook, the nickname that he has acquired over the course of this season. Although we've been talking about his brick potential for quite a while now. Um, so this isn't a new outcome. I think the nickname gaining traction over this season just because he is on the league's most high profile team, even though they're terrible, they get more nationally televised games than anybody else because of the wattage of the franchise, the history of the franchise, and the players and personnel on that team. When you have the aforementioned Westbrook and you have LeBron and AD, you have top tier talent with name recognition, especially in the case of LeBron, to non basketball fans, which means you're going to draw more eyes. And Westbrook is saying, like, I don't want to hear that nickname anymore. And he has stated that he doesn't want his family coming to games because he gets booed and heckled so much. And you feel for him. I don't want his kids to feel bad watching their dad play because the fans boo them. But at the same time, if you don't want the nickname of Westbrook, you alone can change that. You're the only person in the world, the only one. Because guess what? Telling a group of, children they shouldn't call you something. Well, they're going to continue to call it. They're probably going to amp up the amount that they call, you that. And in all of this, Westbrook's wife has gotten into an exchange with Skip Bayless, and she has held herself with a composure that is to be commended. She has laid out her arguments as to, why she has a problem with the situation at hand. And it's measured, it's cogent, it's uh, it's very adult given the situation because you could easily see someone defending their spouse and just going off the rails because of the emotions that are tied up in a situation like this. And her composure is to be fully commended. But unfortunately for Russ, it's like this isn't egregious. There's a clip of Shannon Sharp and Skip on was it Undisputed? I don't watch it, but I did see the clip where the moderator asked Shannon to open, "Do you have any empathy for this situation for Russ?" And he says, "No, because they're calling you Westbrook and not calling you one of 100 other terrible racist things that they could. So it's basically put up or shut up, but you're getting paid 45-ish million dollars to play a game. If the worst that's going to happen is someone lobs the insult of Westbrook, that's not bad." I mean, my first thought upon watching that clip was, think of what Bill Russell had to go through during his day, where there's still segregation in the country. Boston was not a racially harmonious town, to say the very least. Go back and find clips and news articles of the busing fiasco in Boston, and that is brutal to read. And think of all the terrible things that the black players in his era and previous eras had to weather. And that is egregious. There have been, like, there are times where fans definitely go off the rails and go above and beyond anything that is any kind of social decorum. Like, Westbrook has one of the most memorable ones to me, where he's playing in Philly. I think he was still in OKC at the time. And if memory serves, he got an and one. And at the baseline, this guy stands up and does double bird and just screams, "Fuck you," right in his face. And Westbrook stops and gives him the Westbrook face, and then looks at the ref and points at the guy and was like, "Are we really okay with this?" And that to me is like, okay, settle down, guy. Like, booing is one thing, double birding and screaming, "Fuck you," you know, and from the second row, right there underneath the baseline, is exceedingly excessive. And Melo had this, speaking of Philly again, this is why I don't think, if Simmons is expecting a chorus of boos, that's precisely what he's going to get. Melo had that fan thrown out from the Philly game for apparently calling him boy, if you remember that. The guy was sitting close to courtside, and his telling of it was that was a word used in sequence, and when he says it all out, but it doesn't seem, you know, as racially infused as just extrapolating the singular word of boy out. Um, but that being said, I don't remember hearing a single account of anyone sitting next to him agreeing with his assessment of how the action was relayed. And it seemed as though most accounts were siding with Melo that I read. But I mean, that's in Philly, and that's, Utah has a history of being openly racist, brutally so. Westbrook is another example of that from a few years ago. I think it was 2019, um, where he's having to take these racist insults, and that is beyond a bridge too far. It's just disgusting. And Utah, unfortunately, has a history of this. I mean, there are numerous instances where fans cross a line and the players are right to upbraid them and get him kicked out. And in some instances, like the guy in Philly with Melo, he is banned for life. Whether or not that sticks, who knows? What was it? The playoff series between the Hawks and the Knicks, where the fans spit on Trae Young. That's flagrantly disgusting. No place. And if a player steps up and says, "Hey, there's no place for that in our game, in society. You need to be taken out of the situation. We don't need you here. You're a blemish on this game." I agree. But if it's just booze and telling you suck, well, that to me is fair game. That's sport. Like, look at Kyrie's last game in Boston, where the Boston fans were chanting in unison, "Kyrie, you suck, Kyrie." And what did Kyrie do? He looked down, he shook his head, he smiled, and he went out and used that as motivation to beat the Boston Celtics. I mean, they were chanting it so much that Tatum and Brown and other guys were telling the audience, or the crowd rather, to quiet down, to cut that nonsense out. But I don't think in any way, shape, or form that that was a bridge too far. And now, in the player's defense, I can't imagine what it's like to play in today's modern NBA in regards to criticism. Because with the advent of social media, if you want to go and look at your mentions, for as much praise as there might be, there's going to be so many people that are just saying the most heinous and terrible things. And then you couple that with the media cycle now is 24 hours a day, and it's just lobbing criticism after criticism, because from the media's perspective, they need to come up with these clickbaity, hot button, hot take issues. They're going to drive viewership and polarize, people into discussions. So I get it if you're frustrated at the overall, because it just feels like it's a tsunami of criticism nonstop. Uh, but to say that fans booing and telling you suck is uncordial, there's no place in our game, et cetera, to me. Or if you're like Simmons and be like, well, this is the reason that I couldn't play here. Well, that's going to be all of sport. The moment that you underachieve in Brooklyn, they're going to boo you. I'm not saying it's guaranteed that he's going to underachieve, but there will be moments where he's not going to live up to the expectations. People are going to say, we traded James Harden for you, and this is what we got in return. And they're not going to like everything that they see out on the court from him. Um, so you're going to have to suffer those criticisms all over again. That is part and parcel and, you know, the nature of this business. It's why you get paid an obscene amount of money. And I'm all for the players making as many dollars as they possibly can, because they drive the revenue, they drive the sport. Without them, there would be no NBA on a global scale like this, because, the players are the face and ambassadors of the game. But with that comes, it's a two-way street. You get the praise, the accolades, the money, and you also get the criticism, the boos, and the denigration. And it happens to everybody. Look at how much criticism LeBron and Steph weather. LeBron especially. The guy is on a trajectory to be the all-time leading scorer, has innumerable records, will be top 10, and in some cases top 5 in so many different statistical categories. And yet it is a never-ending barrage of heckles and insults and criticism. It's never going to end. Even once he retires, he's still going to be catching strays. It's just going to happen, because you're in this discussion of, is he the greatest of all time? Which means you're going to be on the top of the mind awareness to any NBA fan for a long time, just like Jordan is. Now, with the passage of time, some of that criticism will wither and die on the vine, um, just because people won't have the animus and the emotion that they once did, because it's a memory at this point, um, as opposed to living a day to day and the expectations of what's to come. It's all in the rear view at that point. So you know the full landscape of what they did, as opposed to speculating of what they could do, and that's also part of what drives emotions. Um, but I just think, especially in Russ's case, I'm a Russ fan. It plays with an intensity and a passion that is a joy to watch. For a couple seasons back in his earlier OKC days, he was my favorite player in the league. Just that wasn't a Bull. But, I float around. Right now, it's Ja. Who doesn't love Ja? I'm still upset I couldn't go see him play in, I think it was January because I had COVID. Um, but that does, you're gonna have to take some of these criticisms, man. It is inevitable. It is part of the game. If you don't like Westbrook, only you can change that. Be more judicious as to when you take your shots and selective. Um, don't hoist as many threes. I don't know what to do. Find your sweet spots. Get to the lane more and more and more. Drive winning as much as you possibly can on the Lakers and be part of the solution as opposed to the menagerie of problems that team has. Uh, so anyway, that's that's what I wanted to, discuss on the opening. Now I'm going to move over to your comments in the live chat. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in the live chat. I can't wait to see you guys have cooked up for me today. We're getting towards the end of the season, which there's less than 20 games left for everybody. And we're seeing a lot of jockeying for position. It'll be really interesting how this all shakes out, um, especially for some of the more hot button teams like Brooklyn, because right now, like their opening round game for the play-in would be in Toronto, which means no Kyrie unless somehow Toronto changes their vaccine mandates in the next month or so, um, roughly thereabouts. I don't foresee that happening. So there's a whole bunch. Some teams are in a bit of a free fall. Other teams are ascending. How this is all going to shake out is going to be very, very interesting. Um, just because you don't want question marks popping up now of all times when it comes to the end of the season. I'm looking at you, Warriors. And then certain teams, like they've really figured out exactly who they are. Um, so we're going to jump over to the chat. Chris Quavedo Jr. says hello. Hello, Chris. Jordan Anderson, do you think Kevin Durant will ever be as good as he once was, or will his career continue to decline because of the injuries? Should the Nets look to trade him? I don't, at this point, when I watch him, I don't see decline yet. He does have injuries now that have kept him out. That Achilles, obviously, but that last knee one was kind of a freakish. His teammate rolled into his knee. Was it Claxton? I think it was Claxton. Rolled into his knee and hyperextended that MCL or whatever the specific injury was and kept him out. That could happen to anybody on any night. And when he's out there, he is still wildly effective. The fact of the matter is, given his size and skill set, he can play for a long time. Um, it's part of the reason like LeBron's career has extended so long is he's taking care of his body and his health is always won out by and large. Things are starting to catch up with him now, but it's understandable given the number of minutes and miles he's got. But simultaneously, he worked on his game to extend his range so he didn't have to continue to barrel into the lane. And KD already has that in his bag. He can shoot from anywhere on the floor. He is a threat at all times with the ball. So even if he loses his drive and whatnot, he's still going to be a wildly effective player from mid-range and 3-point. So no, I don't think the Nets should trade him as of right now. I really think they need to see what they've got next year because this year's a wash. They're not going to, I mean, you never know. And once they get in the playoffs, if New York changes their mandate and Kyrie can play every game, maybe they could make a first round upset. I don't know. But, you know, Joe Harris is officially out for the season, and they've got a problem at the 5. And I don't know what exactly they do because when you watch them, you're like, what is your optimum lineup right now? And they haven't even seen what they have in Ben Simmons yet. So if you're excluding Ben Simmons and they don't have a stout 5, defense is going to be a real problem for them. At least with Simmons in there, You might be able to, be a little more flexible as to some of the lineups because he should be able to defend more, types of guys through various positions and sizes. So it'd free up your ability to substitute in certain individuals, like play a smaller lineup out there with Curry or Mills in conjunction with Kyrie and KD. So if you have like those four plus Simmons, well, Simmons then is your de facto five-ish on defense. It increases your switchability on some level, but Curry and Mills, especially Curry, aren't really known for their defense. Neither is Kyrie. So you're expecting Simmons and KD to paper over a lot of your flaws. It's possible, but it's going to be really difficult. And they don't have an answer for Embiid, which is going to be their biggest, if they are going to make some sort of noise there, or the depth of, say, Miami. And then if you go up against Boston, can you really ask KD to play stout defense and help lead the team on the offensive charge when him and Simmons would have to match up with Tatum and Brown and then force the Celtics to say anybody else, can beat us? But if those two are there, then who's on Time Lord? Does that mean then you got to have Aldridge or Claxton in there because Blake Griffin isn't going to play any meaningful minutes as of right now? He looked like a shell of his former self, which is crazy. He came from Detroit. Suddenly he was rejuvenated, and that rejuvenation is completely gone. And just like that, he's going to be out of the league pretty quickly. But no, I would hold on to KD for the time being. I think KD still has incredible value, and you can build a championship roster around him. All right, moving on. Jeremy Bowers, thank you for the compliment. And he is responding to Jordan Anderson's question. TJ Martino says, if it's just a game, then play for free. I mean, I don't know how to respond to that because there's so much money involved. Like, I'm not sure exactly what to make of that. Jay Cleveland said, seeing Jackie Moon was the highlight of my night. Yeah, if you guys didn't see, Jackie Moon showed up with the Warriors at the Chase Center in San Francisco and warmed up with the team, did a lot of drills with Klay Thompson. And it's funny to see Jackie in his headband and afro sticking out, and then there's Klay with his headband and I wouldn't call it afro. It's a slightly longer hair, but it's a modern day equivalent of Jackie Moon going back. But Jackie was helping Klay on his warm up, running, playing defender, and doing some shots. Yeah, it was fun. I watched clips of that, like the initial him warming up and then doing the drills with Klay Thompson's. So TJ Martino says Simmons should have been cut. You don't come to work, you get fired. Yeah, but contracts involved, and if you hold on to him, you can get something for him, which they got Harden. I understand what you're saying, but the economics of the business side of it just dictated that was never going to happen. Jordan Anderson says, what do you think the Phoenix Suns' chances of winning championship are? They have the best record in the league right now. Look, and when CP went down and then Book was going to be out, he's going to be back now, but he missed 4 games because of COVID protocols. I was concerned that given the charge of the Grizzlies, could they slip out? Granted, the games difference is still huge. They're up by a wide margin. It's 8 games right now over the second place Memphis Grizzlies and 8.5 over Golden State. But if they only went, played 400 ball over these last, while CP is out and then Book was out, they could slip down these standings. But Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and the rest of the roster has stepped up. And they're winning games where I was fearful that they might lose. And now Book is back. and they look like the best team in basketball. They have for a long time. Um, can CP come back and be instantly CP? Well, if anybody could, and given what exactly his skill set is on the court, because it's not like he's going to out athleticize, if that's a phrase, anybody. It's his mind that is going to beat you. So an injury like his that takes him out for a while, it was to his thumb. Um, when he comes back, him being a floor general and setting everything up and dictating the pace and the sets that they run, that comes from him surveying the floor, understanding what the defense is throwing at you, and countering that. And that's something that he excels at. He's one of the best that I've ever seen to do that. And in the West, it really comes down to which teams know their personnel the best and know 1 through 8 to possibly 1 through 9 what their rotation is going to be, who the best players are, what their crunch time 5 is going to be. And Phoenix definitely has that. And there's a few teams below them that I think the hierarchy of what everybody does on the team is fully understood. Memphis, Dallas, and Denver being the most obvious. You could throw Utah in that. I think the Warriors are in a bit of disarray, and by bit of, I think that's me being kind and generous. Just because at this point, I almost feel like Clay should cede his minutes to Jordan Poole because he's not at 100%. And I realize everything he's given you in the past, but for this season, if you have championship aspirations, Jordan Poole is playing better basketball right now. But the fact that Phoenix top down knows precisely what they are, I think they have the most legitimate shot to win a championship. I think they're the odds-on favorite. They'll have matchup problems with various teams, but given their flexibility overall and the personnel that they have, I think they can weather just about anything you could throw at them. So unless an injury creeps up in the playoffs, and CP is prone to get injured towards the end of seasons and in the playoffs, but if he can stay healthy, I think they have an excellent chance. Hands down the best in the league. They've been the best team pretty much the entire season, and they're still continuing to prove it. So the only way to cap this off is to win a championship. Jake talking about Westbrook's wife saying Skip blocked her on Twitter, and that actually wasn't true, and Bayless responded to her about that, or is that not true? Skip said he's never blocked anybody. I don't know that the validity of, I didn't see a screen cap of her, because some people do that when they're blocked, and you can screen cap and then show that to the world. I just saw the interactions back and forth. So perhaps she provided evidence of that, but I didn't see it. TJ Martino. TJ, are you a Philly fan? Oh, okay. There it is. Because he keeps talking about basically if you paid me as much money as Simmons, I could take that criticism. And then eventually he says, us Sixers fans are going to file a grievance against the bum Simmons for his performance in the Hawks series. Yeah, you could file a grievance about a couple different playoff series that you had with Simmons. But I think the wisest thing for you guys to do is to do what MSG did with Trae Young, which is coordinate the chance, but keep the chance positive. That way, if they want to take the fan interaction tomorrow night into arbitration, it makes it null and void. Be like, well, look, we were overly positive to him. Here's a massive example of 15,000 people coming together saying, hurrah. It's great to see you, Ben. How are you? Yeah, so long as you guys don't get callous and aggressive with your boos and you just keep it to booze, I think you could still win it. If it gets downright nasty, then he might be able to recoup some of that money. Um, and I'm one of the rare times I'm siding with ownership on this because I think you have to honor the contract that you sign. You can demand a trade, but you still show up, even if you half-ass it like Harden did in Houston, and then half-ass it again towards the end of the Nets run. You're still out there affecting something in the game. Could be losing, and your legacy will suffer that, which is really going to be interesting for Harden. If you guys don't make it to a championship and or win a championship, what will we be saying about Harden in 10 years? He's got a lot to prove. He's got a lot to prove. And then do you give him the mega extension and all that stuff opens up in the offseason? I don't think I would personally. But that's just me. Okay, so some inner chat discussions. And then Jake Cleveland says, I believe right now, and Yuri McGurley, I do see you there, buddy. Jake Cleveland says, I believe right now the Jazz are facing the Mavs in the first round. Who would you favor more in that series? I think the Mavs. By jettisoning Porzingis, it solidified their roster and coalesced the team around the idea that we have one star as opposed to one star and one guy who's held the promise and the draft pedigree of being a number one option, but that's never really translated over the course of a full season. And it doesn't matter at this point who you put on Luka because he's going to get his. I think the most jarring thing is with that last game, I watched them play the Lakers, and he was calling for the switch to get LeBron on him. That's the state of LeBron on defense at this point. Can he still do it for sporadic possessions throughout a game? Of course. For the entire duration, no chance. Which is just so weird because he was an apex predator for so long. And now to see Luka hunting him on screens to try and get the switch that he wants. But I think that if you sowed enough discord between Gobert and Mitchell, that team is just as likely to implode as they are to win a game. There's a lot of dysfunction. I mean, Utah, no idea if this team is going to be the same parts next year as it is this year. I have no idea. The only thing I know is they're committed to Mitchell. So Gobert, you better fall into line. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure what the market is going to be like for Gobert out there. Somebody will take him. But Rudy, you either help make this work or you're going to have to be, looking for homes in a new market. And I think that uncertainty within the team, the fact that they have a track record of flaming out in the playoffs and potentially will be looking at themselves in those crunch time moments with hesitation as opposed to certainty. And the Mavs just haven't been there yet. And I believe that actually will benefit them because they don't have the history of failing at that stage consecutive years. Whereas Utah carries those burdens because it's roughly the same team that's been there doing it together and failing and not fulfilling the promise that they've shown during the regular season. So I favor the Mavs if it were to shake out as it is right now. Now, Utah's, roughly holding their own, but they only have a half game lead on the Mavs. That's another thing, too. The Mavs could easily jump them, and then suddenly they have home court. But I think there's also an outside chance that Golden State slips to 4. And does that mean then the Mavs jump into 3 and you'd have Golden State versus Utah? But I think Utah could slip and Denver could continue to rise. You could see Utah at 6, potentially Golden State at 4, and then Dallas or the Nuggets in the 3 and 5 spots. So in that instance, if it's Utah down to 6, Dallas jumps to 3, well, we still have the same thing all over again. But it's once again still at home for Dallas. I favor Dallas. The matchups as they exist right now, Phoenix and Memphis don't know who they're playing. It'd be Golden State, Denver. It's going to be really tough for Golden State because you're asking a lot of Kevon Looney if Draymond isn't back to try and do something to stop Jokic, but Golden State has more firepower. That'd be a hell of a first round matchup, and then the Utah Dallas one, yeah, that'd be that. That'd be. I mean, those are two great series right there. And the East is going to be a boatload of fun. I mean, there are legitimately 8 teams in the East that I think could make a decent amount of noise. In the West, I think it's 6, maybe 7. So TJ Martino says Harden and Doc will be the Mike and Phil of choking in the playoffs. Wow, as a Sixers fan saying that. Maybe we can work that out, TJ. Yeah, my question, I was having this discussion on Saturday with all the guys that I play basketball with, and I'm the only really stout disbeliever in the Sixers. I'm not sure that they can win a championship. And for this very specific reason. Embiid and Harden shoot so many free throws, and during the regular season, free throws are a large component of their offensive game that you see every year. The refs swallow their whistles, and you're not going to get probably like 40% of the calls that you would get in a regular season game. And late game situations, you're definitely not going to get the call. Possibly in like a game 1 or a game 2, but as the series progresses, it's going to take something just wildly egregious for them to call a foul really late in the game if the game itself hinged on a possession or 2 possessions. It's going to be tough to do. So when you're, Embiid is 2nd in free throws overall and Harden is 5th in free throws overall attempts per game. So between the two of them, just like it means the bulk of your offense, bulk is probably strong, but still, a large chunk of your offense is predicated upon getting to the free throw line. That's going to take a hell of a hit. So suddenly when you're not getting, instead of Embiid getting 14 free throws a night and James getting 10 free throws a night, Embiid is now getting 7 free throws and James is getting 4. Well, you just left 10 points on the board, or how many ever that is. Are you going to be able to make that up? Is Tobias Harris going to be able to step up? Is Danny Green going to be able to step up? The loss of Curry, is that going to hurt them if they need an extra shooter out there? Thibault is awesome, but if you need Thibault to get you a bucket, unless it's a dunk, I'm not sure I trust him to shoot anywhere just yet. Do I think he has the talent to potentially develop that over time? Yes, I do. It's tough for me to envision that being a formula right now. But I could be wrong. They got that's a lot of talent. And they're not exceedingly top heavy like the Nets were with Harden, where it's like we have these 3 guys and then we filled in with minimums underneath. So they have a more balanced lineup overall. And another thing to worry about with the Sixers is the backup big. That's where they've gotten murdered in the playoffs in the past. It's like whenever Embiid has to sit and they need to put someone else in, they get crushed in those minutes. And so much so, what was it? God, I can't remember who it was against, but they end up losing the game by 2 points. And Greg Monroe was the backup, and they were plus 10 with Embiid on the floor and minus 12 with Monroe on the floor for the minutes Embiid had to sit, and they end up losing the game by 2 points. And just like that backup big situation is going to be really key. Because as much as you want to keep charging, I would also kind of be pulling the reins a little bit on Embiid to try and get him rest so we don't gas him. Um, him and Harden. Harden's got a history of being gassed come playoff time, although you could say that he wasn't trying at his full potential during the last how many ever games with the Nets. So he's not as in need of rest as he would have been in his Rocket years. But Embiid is prone to missing games. And so far this year has been better on that scale for him. But I would be concerned. Their backup big situation is tenuous. So it's just the free throws plus that. They have depth at other positions, but not at that one. And, shipping out Andre Drummond, of course you do that deal. You 100% do that deal because you're getting James Harden in return for, in essence, a guy who was not suiting up for you in Ben Simmons. Like, this is a no-brainer move on your part. I get it. But to lose Drummond and Curry does reduce some of your depth, and to reiterate again, at that big position. So Michael Hollenbach says you can't win a championship is all you tried to do is get fouled and make free throws. It's not all they do, but they do it quite a bit. It does piss me off with Embiid. Harden, I've made my peace with it. It's not as bad as it once was, but it's still not fun to watch. And then Embiid, I think 80% of his free throws are deserved, and the other 20% are him flopping. Like, there's against the Bulls, him and Tristan Thompson on the free throw line tussling, and when he flopped to the ground, it's like, dude, you are so huge that there is no chance in hell. Like, someone, you know, brought it up on Twitter to me. It's like, well, Giannis is leading the league in free throws, and you don't have a problem there. And to me, Giannis's free throws to me are a byproduct of his game. He barrels into the lane. He is trying to force the defense to stop him. So of course he's going to draw fouls. And he stands up to the contact. He is more than happy to mean mug and take a hit and try and finish. Whereas to me, Embiid's free throws are a component of his game. It's something that at times he is most definitely hunting for, which is a wise strategy. It really is. Daryl has beat that into his head, and he was already on that trajectory beforehand. It just, there's about 20% of the fouls when I watch him, which is like, oh man, you are so much bigger than that person. Or in the case of Tristan Thompson, it's like, there's no way he hit you or pushed you that hard with his offhand that you had to fly backwards. It's like, it's ridiculous. And the refs rewarding you is unfortunately discouraging. That to me is the difference. So Nazir Muhammad says Sixers fans said thank you for Harden at Thursday night game. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Nazir, but moving on. Oh, we got a little more inner chat discussion. Jake Cleveland says Harden and Embiid need to fix their diets. Embiid, I think, pretty much, he's done quite a bit to remedy his. I mean, he used to eat like shit, but find me an 18 or 19-year-old kid that doesn't. Like, I tried when I was that age just because I knew that it was a recipe for disaster. But at the same time, I still would order pizza at 2 in the morning, on a Friday night, quite a bit. So it's easy to, especially too, it's like their metabolisms are going so strong, so fast. Uh, Whereas with Harden, it's like, yeah, he's gotten a little chunky. Um, so Nazir Muhammad says, I completely understand because in the playoffs, players get different types of calls um, and fouls go down. Yeah. And I think that's rightly so. Let the players decide this, not the refs. Let the game figure itself out as opposed to us manipulating the outcome. And I'm not saying they're overt on it. This isn't a Donahue and Scott Foster situation. Never proven with Scott Foster, but where there's smoke, there's cheating. Um, but yeah, they just you're not. It's rare where the refs have an undue influence on a playoff game. It does happen, but it's not. It's not like the regular season where the refs can take over and change the complexion of a game by trying to stop the chippiness and ejecting guys, throwing coaches, which once again can happen in the playoffs, but it's just a much rarer occurrence. Now, it could be because the sample size is smaller, given there are fewer regular or playoff games compared to the regular season. But watching enough playoff games, you just know they're not going to call certain fouls when you see it, um, and it's a better product, in my opinion, to watch. I think we all enjoy it more. Um, So Mike Hollenbach says Zion needs to fix his diet, and then Jake Cleveland says I agree Zion should lose weight, especially with his knees, as Matt has mentioned in the past. Um, yeah, and they're saying the physiology too of how his hips, knees, and ankles align. They had to reteach him like how to motor around and whatnot to reduce the tension and pressure on his joints. Try and line things up correctly, which can make a difference. I mean, look at Steph retrained himself and has saved his ankles because that's why the Warriors got him on a discount contract and were able to afford Kevin Durant when he came onto the open market, is because at that point Steph was an undervalued asset because he'd had the ankle injuries before he had learned to correct them through different training regimen. So he signed an extension at below where his value could have been had he managed to stay healthy. Um, but yeah, I think Zion, there were the pictures of him where he had ballooned up, but then the most recent pictures I've seen of him looks like he's slimmed down and he's back with the team. They're making a push. They could make it to ninth in the West, possibly eighth. I think that might be a tall order, but they can make it to ninth pretty easily. Um, so Yuri McGarley says Harden's body fat is deliberate, more cushion for the free throw pushing. Good for you. Uh I mean, possibly. Maybe there's some motivation. He can take more hits, but it also reduces his conditioning and stamina. You would assume, at least, because usually when people put on weight, those are the two primary things that are affected. And um, so there it is. I think that's enough for one day. 55-ish minutes. I think we're good to go by the time I wrap up here. Thank you to everybody that joined in the chat. It was a lively chat today, and I appreciate it. Next week, we'll be inching closer and closer to the playoffs. So get ready. I may amp up the release of these for the once the playoffs start, because I'm going to be watching the games pretty religiously. Last year, I think I only missed one game. In the bubble, I think I watched damn near everything. Like I make it a point, pisses my wife off, but I make it a point to try and watch every game. Um, so yeah, I'll let you know. My schedule's pretty busy right now. Um, so I'm not sure if I can carve out the time on the other days of the week when I'm not recording, just because I got a bunch of projects right now coming up that I'm gonna have to dedicate time to that. But I'll let you know. We'll keep you posted. I think that's it for me this week. You can follow me at Matt Knost anywhere. If oh, Adrian Murillo says, saw an undisputed the 76ers might try and get Beal in the offseason. You think it will happen? I saw that too. I haven't looked into it yet. He did shut himself down with the surgery, and the Wizards are going to more than likely offer him the Supermax. I don't know how they get it done if he wants to play with them, unless he's willing to leave that money on the table and leave in free agency. And then what the Sixers will have left over as far as money to afford a free agent like that, I'd be curious. I don't think they can get to a number that rivals anything that the Wizards could pay them and potentially what other teams could pay, especially if he's willing to do a sign and trade. There are other team options that could potentially work better. But I'll be intrigued because that's the first I've heard of that. It seems like Beal was going to sign his extension and stay with the team. So only time will tell. But the offseason is quite a ways off. We'll see. And if the Sixers don't, if they flame out, it looks like Beal might be the upgrade that they need. Possibly. Quite possibly. Maybe they do Tobias Harris to try and get close to the salary matching, and then something else, and then Tobias's contract will be expiring sooner. I don't know how many years are left on that. I want to say 2. But that's off the top of my head. I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, that's it for me this week. Thanks to everybody that tuned in. If you haven't, leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on the podcast, leave a review on Apple or Spotify. I'd thoroughly appreciate it. And subscribe to the podcast. And that is it. I'll see you guys next week with a little bit more NBA discussion as opposed to fan and player interaction for the opening 20 minutes of this, because the playoffs are right around the corner and things are about to get interesting and serious. And we're going to see who's going to be playing who very shortly here. So that is it for Dropping Dimes. Stay safe out there. I'll see you guys real soon. Adios.